these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, that they are endowed by their Creator with certain inalienable rights, that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness.
In our search for knowledge, in our fight for freedom, we, the people, need only go to one source, the United States Constitution. It was written for our empowerment, for the unity of one nation under God. It was written to help us maintain the sovereignty and foundation of a great nation such as ours. You can love it or you can hate it, but first, you must learn it. For that, we present you, Foundation of a Nation.
Hallelujah, government is king. If you still believe we're created to be free, lift your hands up high, shout it out with me.
And now your host, Sheryl Devereaux.
So welcome to Foundation of a Nation. This is Sheryl Devereaux. I have a special guest with me tonight. I have with me Robert Gonzalez, who is running for the congressman seat of the now coming vacant seat of Ron Paul in the state of Texas. So if you are in our district down here, then you will enjoy the show. If you are not from this district, you will enjoy the show because, as always, we talk about the Constitution. Robert, I've talked to a couple of times, and we're going to have a great, engaging conversation. He's also a constitutionalist in his own right. So we're going to talk about a lot of the things that we'd like to see changed, some of the problems there are, maybe some of the things that don't need to be changed, if there are some. Okay, but before we do, I would like to give Robert a few minutes just to talk about himself. He has a very interesting background. He'll never be president of the United States because he knows the Constitution, and he is an immigrant who came here legally, who fought for his citizenship. And I'm going to let Robert talk a little bit about that, take a few minutes to share with our audience your background.
I would love to, Sheryl. Thank you very much for giving me the opportunity to be here. It is definitely my pleasure of having the opportunity to speak to the folks in the space or internet space,
the cyberspace,
and give me the opportunity to let them know who I am. Yes, I was born in Cuba. I was born in 1960, a year after Fidel Castro took power, and we live under tyranny, of course. And the first 8 years of my life were spent in Cuba. In 1963, I have to go back to 1961 when my uncle, who had actually helped Fidel Castro take power, found out that Castro, when he declared his Marxist philosophies, he found out that wasn't what he bargained for, and he went and protested against it, and he ended up being killed by Castro's government. He was found by my grandmother, and he was ice-picked 35 times, and that's how they found him.
Oh my goodness!
You can come and help Castro, but if you try to get out of his,
out of his regime, his network,
you don't make it through. So that said, my uncle was killed by Castro, and so in 1963, my mom and dad went to the Red Cross. The Red Cross had a place that allowed those who wanted to immigrate to the United States to fill out the proper paperwork and try to get an exodus visa. Well, it took until 1967, November 67, before we got our walking papers, if you will, and we had an opportunity to come to the greatest country God has shed His light on. We had an opportunity to come to a land that afforded us freedoms, the opportunity to succeed. We had a place where we could make a living and just enjoy the fruits of our labor. The rights for liberty, justice, and the pursuit of happiness. And so we came here in 1967, like I said. But before we came, a little story I want to tell you. 3 armed men came to our home, and they did an inventory of everything we owned. In Cuba, you have things, but you don't own things. And so what happened was they came and they inventoried our home, and they left, and they told my mom and dad, we'll be back to give you your going away paper so you can go. And a couple of weeks later, they came back, and they did a secondary inventory of our home, and everything that we had on our person we were able to keep, but everything, jewelry, anything that you had that was sitting on a counter, it was theirs. So they literally told my mom, pack 2 change of clothes and get your kids outside the house, and we were literally kicked out of our house. We couldn't give anything away. We couldn't sell it because it wasn't ours.
Right.
And the government people, they knew what we owned because our neighbors told. You know, it's just like it's just the way it is. And so we couldn't really give anything away. We couldn't hide anything because, you know, they just knew.
Right.
And so in 1967, we got the chance to come to the United States. We came in through Miami, and of course legally. And the first 2 months we spent in Miami, and then my mom went to Catholic Charities and asked for help to get our feet on the ground. And they gave us 3 choice cities. One was Chicago, the other one was Philadelphia, and the last one was Portland, Oregon. And guess where a bunch of Cubans went? We went to Portland, Oregon. So we ended up in the Pacific Northwest, and the first 8 years of my life there were spent in a land that was, there are no, hardly any Hispanics, and where you learn the language, the culture, and the American way of life. And so we all learned to be Americans, and it was great.
I'm going to interject here a little bit because I know Oregon. I've lived in Portland, Oregon.
Oh, you did?
Yeah, and it's a pretty liberal state.
Very liberal.
So I'm very curious how you ended up from your first indoctrination here was from a very liberal state, not like Massachusetts, but you know, pretty strongly liberal state. How did you end up from that as your initial culture here to being so conservative, and not just fiscally conservative, but governmentally, constitutionally conservative? How did that happen?
It's Cheryl, that's easy because, you know, if you come from Cuba and you come with a big family, well, most of the indoctrination happens at home. My dad was, I mean, he was ahead of his time. I remember when Ronald Reagan was the governor of California, my dad would come and he would tell me, this guy's a good man. Look what he's doing. At the time, there were a lot of police being shot and killed by, you know, the movement that was happening in the 60s, you know, late 60s and early 70s. And Ronald Reagan, you know, clamped down and he took law enforcement into his own hands, and because he's the executive of the state, and he really turned things around. A lot of those people ended up in Portland, Oregon, believe it or not. I'm sure you know about that.
That's right. In fact, Californians are not very well liked in Oregon because of that mass exodus.
And that happened in the early 70s, and so we were there when that happened. And I remember my dad telling us how the different things that were happening in the United States that he didn't like, and he would always point these little things out. And that's why I tell people that I'm running for office because I see a lot of the little things that really, if you put them all together, it's like a snowball. I mean, you get a snowball and you throw it down the hill, before you know it, it's a huge avalanche, you know. And so, again, I was indoctrinated. That's a wrong word because that takes a negative connotation, but I was schooled by my dad.
Very good.
And it was done at home, and I spent a lot of time. And I'll tell you why I was like that, because when we came to the United States, we, as a family, picked strawberries. We picked string beans. We cut cauliflower and broccoli, and we wrapped it and stuff like that. We did this as a family. This is how we started. You know, of course, we got help from the Catholic Church. We got a home. The American people were good to us. You know, the church was good to us, and they gave us a hand up, Cheryl, not a handout. And there's a difference, you know. And so we all ran with it, you know.
Yeah.
And so, like I said earlier, we learned the language, the culture, and we just had an opportunity, and and that's one of the reasons I'm running, Cheryl, is because I was given a lot by the American people, and two entities. You know, they said that there are 2 entities that gave their life for us, and one is Jesus Christ. Right. He gave his life for our soul, and then the American soldier who gave his life for our freedom. And I haven't ever forgot that, you know. And so when we were growing up, I remember my dad and I were watching Walter Cronkite on CBS Nightly News.
A great American in his own right, too.
Yeah. And so he was, and this is 1973, I'll never forget this, 1973, and I remember the Vietnam veteran coming home, and the people in San Francisco were spitting on him.
Right. Yeah.
And my dad told me this, Cheryl. He said, Robert, if these people realized who they were fighting, they'd instead of spitting on them, they'd be kissing their boots. Yeah. That's what my dad told me. I've never forgotten that, you know, because we came to the United States in '67 with a Vietnam War veteran were fighting the same communists, the same ideology that we were fleeing, even though it was on the other side of the world, it was the same communist nature, you know. And our American soldiers in Vietnam were fighting the same enemy. So I have never forgotten. That's why I have a great affinity for the Vietnam veteran, because we were fleeing tyranny and they were fighting tyranny for the South Vietnamese. And so I don't think that their efforts should be left in vain. Yeah. And I just don't like what's happening in this country. I don't like where we're headed, and I just believe that someone has to stand up, someone who wants to give something back, someone who wants to serve. And that's why I decided to run, you know. I just don't think that there are enough people who are going into office for the right reasons.
You know, and you've made a number of points that I'd like to point out. One is the importance of the family, which is actually, we're being robbed daily. If you look at what is happening from the UN to the federal government down, there are a lot of little things that that our children are growing up learning that make them independent of their family rather than cohesive with it.
Right.
Which is diametrically opposed to what was intended originally. And when you look at what the founding fathers studied from Plato to Aristotle and forward, all of them, family was always
absolutely
the core basis. Aside from your personal integrity, your virtues, the family was that core that that you grew up with. And from there, your next family was your community.
Absolutely.
And they all built on each other from the ground up.
Absolutely.
So so that's a great point. That to me is an exceptional point, because we have a lot of people right now, I think on the even on the federal level, who are running on a very strong family-oriented thing. But we don't have a lot of people in right now that are like that. They say it. And we even have some presidential candidates who it's questionable. So that matters. I think that should really matter. Aside from that, I'm going to let you speak in a second. I'm going to bring up a second point.
Sure.
Point right here. There's another interesting thing that you said. Just by your example that you said, that's also really important for our country, and that is that we do not have a proper perspective on our relationship to the world. It's been very warped. Again, and we're going to talk about this today. We're going to talk about the UN, but it's been warped because we've had the federal government has been working on the UN hierarchy of doing things and passing things down.
Absolutely.
And the problem with that is that what do we get? We get whatever the UN wants us to see, and people do not understand that. I've been working on this since I first went to school in 1978. I first went to 1982. I think is when I had this class, my first poli-sci class in college, and I did a huge report on the UN, and was stunned. And was stunned on the things that we don't normally see. Well, even that, my professor, she hated it. She hated it. She said, "This person was a patriot, etc., etc. You can't say this about this. You can't say this about this." Well, but it was there.
Right.
And the reality is that a lot of what we are learning is cherry picked from people who want us to see it a certain way. Your perspective is a fresh perspective, but it's actually an accurate perspective, because where have you been? You've been elsewhere. I've got some friends in Utah that he, as a congressman, he married a Ukraine lady who knows firsthand.
Of course.
Firsthand. And so those two qualities, you sort of alluded to the importance of it without really saying it, just because of your background. I'm going to give you a chance to share.
And I agree with you. I don't know I've never, if you know this or not, but I come from a family that there's 11 brothers and sisters. Mm-hmm. So we have a huge family. And family was obviously very important to us. And I remember Thanksgiving or Christmas Eve, we always got together. And whenever we had a friend that didn't have a place to go, we'd bring them. Mm-hmm. And they were always welcome,
Yeah.
And so family to us is very important. And I believe that, back in the day when I was growing up, obviously grew up here in the United States, because the first 8 years I was in Cuba, but after that you do your growing up stages, you know, and
That's right.
I remember that if we did something wrong, our neighbors used to go and they used to go and tell on us.
Right.
And we wreaked the havoc of our indiscretions. And
Yes.
so
Yes.
it was the community, like you said. And secondly, the UN. We are losing our sovereignty in this country. We are giving up the God-given freedoms. They're God-given, and that's why we have the Constitution, because the Founding Fathers believe that the rights that we have are from God and not from man. And we are making treaties, and we're allowing those in the UN who really don't like us and have different ideals than we do to help make policy. And but it's permeating. It's not only in the national level, but it's permeating all the way down to the local level with Agenda 21 and the sustained development. So sustainable development, excuse me. And so we are, and that scares me because the American fabric is a God, Judeo-Christian foundation. Once we lose that, we've really lost the country that we know. And
well, we certainly don't get the protection of deity if we turn.
Absolutely.
Yeah. You know, I've always decided, I have decided since I've been an adult especially, that I'm much better off with somebody a little higher than me helping me out than trying to figure it out myself.
Yeah.
And, you know, it's just the bigger problem with when it's our whole country.
Right.
You know, it's, and the Founding Fathers were that way. The Founding Fathers, I don't care what, this is also a misnomer, that they were mostly deists. That's a lie.
It is.
That is a flat-out lie.
It is.
And those documents are there to read. Their letters and their statements are there to read for the reading.
Right.
But it's not coming out either.
But it's part of the agenda to try
Right.
to steer us away from you know, a godly perspective, and that is the perspective and the agenda of the left. Because you see, John Adams said that the Constitution was made for religious and moral people, and it's wholly inadequate for any other. If you lose God, the Constitution means nothing to you because it's based on biblical principles. So if you don't have the biblical foundation and the biblical principle to begin with, well, then you can't believe that the Constitution is worth anything other than to, you know, to use it for just such historical purposes. Other than that, it doesn't mean anything.
Well, and you know what? And see, even with that, though, you know, I would even argue that even because the Founding Fathers knew that there would be no liberty here if they designed a particular religion.
Right.
So they knew that even though it was Judeo-Christian, which means the Ten Commandments, okay, you know, there's a student in one of my classes who said, well, the Old Testament, is that Christian? I'm thinking, yes, it's Christian. Where did the Ten Commandments come from? So, you know, but the reality is it's Judeo-Christian because it serves two very strong religious backgrounds. Here's the thing, though, that's really important that the Founding Fathers relied on, that people would adhere to those regardless of their particular tenets.
Right.
That they would honor those because those were right.
Right.
So if you are Muslim, Christian, Buddhist,
Hindu,
anything, Protestant, whatever it is, it was the intent to rely on those same core moral values.
Right.
And of course they came from the Bible. But even in a home that doesn't, and we could argue this, I've actually had a whole show on just nothing but the Judeo-Christian background, a couple shows maybe. So not to diminish the importance of a religious foundation and the Judeo-Christian foundation of this nation. Not diminishing that. But the Founding Fathers wanted to protect all people.
Mm-hmm.
That does not mean...
Absolutely.
Yeah. That does not mean that they wanted them to change.
Absolutely.
You know, our structure.
It's respect of the individual.
Yeah.
But
still, you don't kill.
Preserving the law.
Exactly.
Absolutely.
Exactly. It was all based on the Ten Commandments and how those are performed. And you know, to go along with this, I'm just going to put this in here. I'm not going to. I swear to you, I'm not going to take all the time. There is one thing though with what we're talking about that I'd like to clarify a little bit, and that is that when we think of a moral society, there is this phrase that people use, they say that you can't legislate a moral society. Okay, that is being taken out of context. I've said this several times. What that phrase was meant to say, what is meant to teach people is you don't have to legislate a moral society because they are already self-governing.
Absolutely.
Which is exactly what John Adams was saying. And so it's the people that are not that need to be legislated to become that.
Right.
And so, I just want to clarify that because I'm willing to...
What is law but morality? That's what law is.
That's exactly what it is. Okay, so let's talk about the UN a little bit, unless you want to follow up with some things.
No, that's fine. Let's go.
Okay. I gave Robert a list of things that we're going to go on, and some of the executive orders are actually following some of the lead of the UN. But we're going to talk specifically about the UN, and I don't think I even put this in the list specifically. But since we've gone there, I'd really like to talk about it.
Okay, let's go.
All right. So, of the things, now you talked about Agenda 21.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, and there's the Copenhagen Treaty, which is also a green. It's the one of the other sustainable living things. It also has
sustainable development. Yeah.
Yeah, correct. And they're using it as a guise to. That's the one that's actually forming another government.
Right.
Okay. So, how do you see your role as a congressman being able to curtail or change or modify? What would you do, or what do you think you can do, if anything, to help stop the infiltration of UN stuff, this UN stuff?
Well, let's talk about executive orders,
okay.
Because a lot of this stuff that is being handed down through the UN is happening through executive order. That's how it's happening.
Yeah.
I don't know, I'm sure you're well versed that the executive orders, there's only been 2 that have been overturned, and so the presidents, from George Bush to Clinton to Obama, they really don't think that they have to come to Congress for certain things.
Mm-hmm.
And so the executive orders that are being written through the agencies like the EPA and the Department of Energy and Department of Interior. And so what they're doing is to bypass Congress. What they're doing is they're going to these agencies and they're actually going and having them pass laws that they couldn't get passed through Congress.
Exactly.
And through these laws, their edicts would become executive orders. So the same thing is happening with the UN. They want to create a global government.
Mm-hmm.
The UN thinks that if we can somehow govern the peoples of the United States, they can govern the world. And they're probably right.
Yeah.
We are the last bastion of freedom. And so it is all happening through agencies. And that's why, as a congressman, you asked me, what can I do? Well, one of the things the Congress has is they have the purse strings. Okay? Mm-hmm. They can defund many of these projects. People talk about, well, let's just get rid of the EPA. Well, first of all, it sounds good, and I would like to, but it's not palatable to most people. So what you do is you curtail the funding that they have, and you cut it back. You can do that because you hold the purse strings.
Right.
You can do the same thing with the Department of Education. We talked about the moral foundation. We talked about the family and stuff like that. Well, what's happening here is that because of the cost of living and stuff like that, many moms and dads, whether they want to be at home or not, are working.
Mm-hmm.
So the schools have taken the onus on themselves to raise these kids. Well, who is minding the store? The education system, and it's all being brought down through the Department of Education. That's one department that you can't get rid of. You can get rid of it. Okay.
Right.
The agencies are the vehicle in which the executive orders are being brought down through. And what happens here is that the congressional office holders, they're only right during they can't do anything with that executive order. The only thing they can do is defund it. They hold that power. And so as an elected official, that's what I would do. I would fight to defund these agencies that are legislating these bills.
Okay, and just so you know, we've covered this before, but if you haven't been on the show before, you listened to it. What Robert is really talking about is that the Senate actually is the part of Congress that approves treaties after the president signs it. So a congressman has no vote really on that.
That's correct.
But the Congress is specifically by the Constitution the area that of the Congress that the part of the Congress that, like he says, holds the purse strings. They are the ones that allocate money. Okay, so that is a check and a balance. It's a check because what happens is if there's something that they don't like and they don't have the power to change it through a regular legislative process, they can defund it.
Absolutely.
Okay, so
that's powerful.
It's very powerful. Now, something that's occurred to me, and I'm going to throw this out here for you to just maybe, and I don't know if I emailed you about this, but it occurred to me that there is actually a way to modify what the president does with executive orders. Now, executive orders that we've talked about before are in the Constitution. It's not called an executive order. It's said in Article 2.
Articles 2, Section 1.
I'm going to let you quote it then.
Well,
can you quote it or
I don't know if I
paraphrase
can
it?
quote it, but it has the power. The president has the power to
execute the law.
Absolutely. Yeah.
That's what it is.
Execute
the law.
That's it.
That's it.
It doesn't exactly say that you have executive order power.
Well,
it's not in the Constitution anyway.
And that's right. So an executive order is designed to execute the law. Who makes the law? Congress.
Right.
Okay? The Senate, the bicameral Congress, the Senate and the House of Representatives. They make the law. The President has to execute it. That is his duty, to execute the law, not to create it. He is obligated to execute what the Congress allocates, what they say.
And it's really the other way around. It's not the tail wagging the dog. It's the dog wagging the tail in this case, and that's what Congress is.
Yeah.
And it's really a unique balance of powers. And the Founding Fathers really were beyond their years because each power checks each other.
Yeah. Yeah.
We're losing that power right now. These executive orders that are being written by the last few presidents, you can't just blame it on Obama because Bush did the same thing.
That's right.
So
Obama has just grossly.
He's on steroids with executive orders.
Oh yes, yeah. Talk about exploitation.
Yes, he is.
Yes, he's done it quite well. All right, so here's the idea I'd like to propose then. What if Congress, because obviously the Senate is in control of what the treaties, these social treaties, which were never part of the intent of the Founding Fathers.
Right.
It was peace treaties that they talked about with the Supremacy Clause. But what if the Congress, and I'm talking about the House of Representatives, put forth a bill that actually strictly defined what the executive officer, the chief officer, could do with an executive order, and put it back into what it was intended with the Congress. Said just like they did with the original Patriot Act in 1965. I think it's 1972. Anyway, I think it was 1972. But the original Patriot Act only followed actually what was already in the Congress, which was that if there was an insurrection or an invasion,
right,
the president could call up arms.
Right. Outside
of that, if it was a full-on war, that was up to the Congress. And that's the original Patriot Act did that.
Right.
What if we did something like that with this?
I think that's not a bad idea if you can actually specify how the powers are going to be laid out. We talk about the War Powers Act. That's one of the. It kind of goes in line with this.
Well, and when I said Patriot Act, excuse me, that's what I meant. I meant the War Powers Act.
That was 1973.
Okay, it wasn't 1972. 1973. Very good. See, he knows his stuff.
Yeah,
Good.
That was 1973.
Good. Yeah.
The War Powers Act has been set up so that the president comes to the Congress, that's both houses, and says, I have started a war, and he has to do it within 48 hours. Then, if there is no declaration of war, he has 60 days to bring his troops home, and then 30 days to get them all, draw back.
90 altogether.
90 days altogether.
Right.
Now, that's
which we're in violation of right now.
Absolutely. Now, President Clinton in '99, in the bombing of Kosovo, he just took the Constitution, or he took the Four Powers Act, excuse me, and he
ignored it.
He just threw it out the window. Yeah. He ignored it. Well, Obama did the same thing in Libya. He ignored it, and he's doing. So he's going in there and calls it a kinetic war. And the American people, the majority of the American people are ignorant of this, and they say, well, man, this is something new. Kinetic war, I don't know. They're bombing with cruise missiles. It's a bombing mission. So what has happened here is that the congressional body is afraid to go against them because he thinks he's going to lose a vote here or there. I'm not really sure why they're afraid to. And secondly, because, like I said earlier, the Supreme Court has only overturned 2 executive orders, so they're afraid to even take this to the next level. So what does President Obama do? He just runs amok.
Yeah.
Now, it doesn't matter what Boehner said. Doesn't matter what
give me a blank piece of paper and a pen.
Yeah, and he doesn't care whether he has to come back to him. He actually says, if I have to do it with Congress, I'll do it.
Right, and if I can't get them to go along, I'll just do it around them anyway.
Sheryl, this is the problem.
Mm-hmm.
This is the problem. You have to have men and women, it doesn't matter, who have the mental and the gut fortitude to say enough is enough and make a big deal out of it. We don't have that right now.
Yeah.